The fervent desire for freedom within the heart of man has revealed to us the very extent of our humanity and has brought us to the farthest reaches of resolve and fortitude. The heart-wrenching stories of the Middle Passage represent for us a watershed moment in the history of our humanity. Yet the story did not end with, nor was it solely dominated by, atrocity. Within the dank shade of that moment in human history, there have indeed been apertures of pure light.
I think of the Americans, my ancestors, in a period of time, 35 to 4,000 people whose souls were on fire because of enslavement. And they needed a way to escape that enslavement. The kind of chance that they took to just assuage the situation that they were in, and by entering a war that they didn't know whether they would survive or not.
Fleeing from the metallic whisper of chains, there was one overwhelming desire in the hearts of these men and women. They wanted to be free, and the British, who were at war with the Americans, welcomed them.
Why would the British want runaway slaves? They were very busy in France, well, in Europe. With the Napoleonic Wars, they were using a lot of their manpower there, and they needed to build up their troops. And so this was an easy way to convince runaway African-American slaves who were, of course, not very happy with the U.S., by the U.S. treatment of them and not giving them their freedom. So the British came in at the right time, saying they would promise them their freedom, and these slaves joined the ranks with the British.
If we look back to that early period of the 19th century, Britain found itself in conflict with the United States, as we all know. And as part of that conflict, a whole lot of slaves in the United States initially came as refugees to the British forces. There was a British admiral whose name is Alexander Cochrane, and he kind of saw an opportunity there. And he was building on a lot of movements that were happening at that time. We're at the beginning of the period when people were thinking about the rights of slaves. The slave trade had been banned in the UK in 1807. There had been a slave revolt in Haiti, which had, if you like, revolutionized the way people thought about slavery and the rights of these people. So Cochrane was building on a, if you like, a wave of changes going through the region, the Caribbean region. And he saw this opportunity, so he actually reached out to the slave populations of the United States and said that they should come under the British flag and effectively serve in return for freedom, in return for their liberty.
The War of 1812 was one of the most intense wars fought between a former colony and their former colonial masters. Yet, amid the clamor and calamity of war, the enslaved black Americans responded to the clarion call that echoed within them, year after fettered year. During the war, several of those enslaved along the east coast of the United States escaped from the cold chains of slavery.
The 4,000 enslaved Americans who made what I call the Great Escape, the 4,000 Americans who quit their slavery during the War of 1812. It was the largest emancipation between the events in Haiti at the turn of that century and British colonial emancipation in the 1830s, and a full half-century before American emancipation with the Civil War.
Because slavery was so harsh, they developed their own language so that the slave master could not detect what they were saying. And through their song and through their religious gatherings, the slave master never knew what they were saying. Those traditions came over with the African Americans that settled here in Trinidad.
So not only were the Americans fighting to maintain the integrity of their status as an independent nation, but within that independence, the enslaved were hoping to taste freedom as well, some of them for the very first time.
My aunt would speak of a great Uncle Bukusu. And I used to wonder, well, Auntie Lane, where did that name come from? And she says, well, I don't know, that was my grandmother's brother. And so for all the questions that I would ask, there would be partial answers. But on this particular voyage, I made this discovery. And it was quite amazing because it took me into the National Archives of Trinidad, then on to the National Archives of London, and then the United States. And I made some remarkable discoveries about the fact that my people were enslaved in Virginia, and during the War of 1812, specifically on the day of April 18, 1814, they made their bid for freedom by running away, joining the British Royal Navy, becoming colonial Marines. So this is the letter from the overseer to the master describing the escape of my foreparents. Dear sir, this will inform you that on the 20th day of this month, just after sunrise, there appeared 4 barges heavy loaded with men. They appeared to be coming directly to the house where I live. I got all of my things out of the way of the British and all of the stock of every kind, and directed all the Negroes to get up to the new settlement, and from thence into the woods. When I returned, after getting my family up to Brent's in 1 hour, Kennedy, Ezekiel, and Tom Saunders had gone off to the British. The British were in pursuit of a vessel loaded with flour. The said vessel went up the creek to anchor within 400 yards of your new settlement. They took that vessel and Captain Cornell's vessel and went out in less than 2 hours. I believe the barges came up the same night and took a rappel out of Lockley Creek. I am concerned if the British should frequent Rappahannock River, a number of Negroes will go with them. Write me on what step to take. I have been more distressed this time than all the rest. If these times should last, I mean to go home next year. I am, dear sir, respectfully, John Richardson.
The moment, the fact that we run, I say I am a rebel. And the fact that we run away and fought for our independence, I look at the people with pride. That is the defining moment. I said these people fought for their independence. It wasn't given to them. And some died.
It does speak to faith and to human resilience and courage and the power of the struggle for freedom, I think.
The Corps of Colonial Marines distinguished itself very quickly, and they took part in some very significant military actions, including the famous burning of Washington, which resulted in the White House having to be painted white.
With the Treaty of Ghent signed on the 14th of December 1814, the war came to an end. Neither Britain nor the United States had lost any territories, but the Native American Indians had lost just about everything. And the Corps of Colonial Marines, so adroit during the war on the seas, needed somewhere to rest their battle-worn feet.
There's one memory spiritual called Sail Out and By, which seems to refer to the time that they spent on these ships during a war. And the lines are, sail out and by, sail-o, sail out and by. Captain say, sail out and by, sail-o, sail out and by. Diver say, sail out and by, sail-o, sail out and by. Nursey say, sail out and by, sail-o, sail out and by. So you have the diver, the captain, the nurse. You have these people who are very much a part of their lives as they were on these ships.
But that life of being adrift from their destinies was over. It was time now to search the horizon for a new home, to say goodbye to America once and for all.
Since they could not go back home, I think if they had gone back to the USA, they would have been, hanged in the nearest tree. So the British had to find a place for them. And therefore the British government asked various West Indian governments if they would take these demobilized soldiers, these soldiers who had fought in the war.
At the end of the war in 1815, members of the Corps of Colonial Marines were sent to Bermuda, where there was a major naval dockyard. While there, they were offered various opportunities to engage once more in military service. But the heart's desire was clear. Having witnessed the turbulence and dust-blown lives of slavery and war, these Marines and their families wanted their liberty, wanted to live as free men and women.
There's no doubt that the spirit of independence that people have commented on in, let's say, the last 100 years independence and awkwardness was there from the beginning. And they were, the colonial Marines even threatened to go on strike when they were stationed in Bermuda because they didn't like the work they were being asked to do unless they were given some extra pay for it.
Of about 4,000 of the corps of colonial Marines who took up the offer from the British to settle in British territories after the war, almost 2,000 went to Canada, settling primarily in Quebec, Ontario, and Nova Scotia.
Of those 2,000 that went to Canada, about 100 took advantage of a subsequent offer to relocate. So in 1821, the British authorities offered to resettle anyone who wanted to in Trinidad and Tobago. And so we found that of the original 2,000 that went to Canada, about 95 came to Trinidad and Tobago at that time and joined the original Americans who had come right after the war.
Once more, a sea change found its way into the fates of these now free people. They were to once again brave the ocean, this time destined for the shores of Trinidad.
When news came to the Trinidad planters of the impending arrival of the colonial Marines, there was quite a bit of opposition. They didn't want ex-slaves exciting their slaves into unrest. And so in the end, Governor Woodford placed them in the south in an area of virtually virgin forest that was, if you like, on the edge of the existing cultivated area. And maps of the time show that the area was just plain blank.
And I want you to imagine so many years ago, 1816, 1820, when the companies landed in Trinidad. At that point in time, the area was really very forested, very isolated. Even today, if you go to Moruga and you go to the southern part of the country, you see the forest, you get a clear sense of how isolated the area is even today. So throw your mind back to the early 19th century, and you get a clear sense of how difficult it would have been for these pioneers. And yet they survived.
Remember, Americans came in 1815, 16. We still had slavery. Trinidad had just become British in 1797, and these people came, 15, 18 years afterwards, in the height of slavery, and yet you were empowering black people. For me, that is the sense of pride, eh? Yet you were empowering black people. They had already gotten their freedom in America. They had fought for it. Their land was their payment, and here it is that you were giving each family 16 acres of land to do something for themselves. Never mind it was virgin land in uncharted territory. I think that is important. I think that is special.
The Corps of Colonial Marines, responding to the final call of the muster of freedom, found themselves on the south coast of Trinidad. Trained military men assaulted with the calm of the abounding vegetation on land that was awaiting occupancy. Yet an echo of the past remained.
Trinidad was a very recent acquisition as a British colony. It was not well populated. It was not one of the more established colonies in the West Indies. So that meant that it really suited the British governor at the time to bring in new populations, and particularly this population of clearly very hard-working, enterprising and determined people who'd be able to live as free men, as a kind of yeomanry of small-scale farmers.
They were recruited in company batches with a head sergeant. That's the same way they came to Trinidad. That's the same way they were, let's say, transplanted and brought here. And when the villages were set up, whoever was the sergeant or what have you in charge ended up being in charge of the village.
They were craftsmen. They knew how to grow anything, but they had a skill. They had a skill. And that's what they did here. They built their community with the African traditions from the motherland, Africa.
I read something about somebody who went into the area, and he said, these people are wonderful people. They have transformed this section of Trinidad. They have transformed it, and he was amazed at the progress they had made.
settled in company villages in the district of Moruga to the very south of Trinidad. These now free families continued to show a diligence that astounded those who witnessed it, marshaling their new destinies with a fierce determination. They became distinctly known as the Merikins.
What I really found fascinating in my trip to Trinidad was the discovery that the names of these villages, the companies that these people served, are still a part of the environment. There were 6 companies. My family happened to be part of the 4th company. But to walk into a community where 200 years later you see the signs of the 1st company, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, is just an amazing revelation to me.
Not only was the physical development of the company villages a significant part of the lives of the Merikins, but their spirituality, which had carried their hearts through slavery and the war, continued to be at the very center of their lives.
Dreams and vision, yes, were significant for parents because this is what they believed in and this is what they lived by, especially when their dream came to pass. More so they hold on, and therefore this actually they perpetuated to their next generations.
The Baptist faith, which was practiced by several of the enslaved in the southern states of America at the time, had carried these men and women through the dismay and dread of slavery, and they refused to leave it behind.
I think the spirituals, and if as you look in the U.S. as well as throughout the Caribbean, African descendants are very religious and very spiritual. And I think it's because it was a way of release from the harshness of slavery and the work that they did. I say it's a glue that held their sanity together, their religion and their spirituality.
At this period of our lives, the Merikins, or forefathers, have left us with this rich legacy of faith in Jesus Christ, of faith in our God, and we are able to build on it continuously.
The American, no doubt, have laid a foundation, and that foundation was laid by and through spirituality. And therefore, the generations coming, no doubt, would have inherited this. And because of this, no doubt they would have transcended all boundaries.
Here you had a group of people who would do anything to gain their freedom and went through incredible ordeals in a very remote island far away from their home, which was the southern United States, and yet forged a community and kept hold of their pride and their sense of identity and their special kind of Christianity right up to the present day.
In a strange land with nature abounding about them, these now free men and women had to shape their new world into communities, spaces of hope and healing. One man, Samuel Ebenezer Elliott, a descendant of the American people, had become one of those healers that restored the unsure eyes of the sick to the light of day.
Papa Nisa, Ebenezer Elliott, he was a true American, a member of the 3rd Company Baptist Church, and he had his own little chalet where he used to attend to people, attend to sick people. You would never hear Papa Nisa doing anybody anything bad. It was only about goodness. He had a tremendous reputation.
The company villages and the wider area of South Trinidad is still heavily populated by American descendants, many of them not knowing that they descended from persons who rejected slavery outright and triumphed over it before the disbelieving eyes of the world.
So I think we can see the Americans as not only pioneers within Trinidad, but pioneers of actually the concept of abolitionism and freedom from slavery.
In the same way, for example, that every European schoolboy or every Greek schoolboy or every Russian schoolboy could use Greece as part of his or her intellectual heritage and use their contribution to civilization as part of their whole historical and cultural development. To my mind, the parallels are the same that can be drawn from the story of the Merikins.
Many great stories of triumph of the human spirit have been drowned by the broken bridges between generations. But none of these stories is beyond resuscitation or revival.
It's an inspiring story, and I think it's a story that deserves to be told, deserves to be known not just here in Trinidad and Tobago, but also in the other 3 countries of whose history it forms a part.
There is a strong bond between the U.S. and Trinidad beyond the strong governmental bilateral relationships that we have. It's a people bond, and I just believe that this story will enrich that bond even more. And to me, it has come full circle. I see the connection, and I want to tell the story, to youth especially.
A lot of young people now, a lot of students that I may encounter, or even people my age, don't know about the American history as such.
Nothing in the school books about the free blacks coming here, nothing much in the school books about the 1812 war, and therefore it was just something that, you know, like the forgotten war, you know. So this is the time, I think the time is now where we can really revive the people and bring the history alive, and I'm proud to be part of that circle.
As a child, I always heard the word American, American.
You began to identify names, and you knew then that the Jacksons, the Huggins, the Loneys, the Westons, you knew they were all part of the clan.
African tradition lent itself to the oral tradition, where you tell stories and you pass it down from one generation to the next. But in today's society, people don't talk enough.
The other part that I find really very moving, and it's the idea that how this story was able to survive through the generations of oral history, keeping in mind that the Americans were not allowed to learn to read or write. So this story could not really be told except among themselves and passed down through the generations.
It's all about bringing this alive. It's all about looking at some of the practices that kept them alive and how we can reintroduce it in our society today. And I think it's a really, really great path to follow.
The descendants are very accomplished people in different nations, in the States, in Canada, in England. They've gone into various professions. And when you think of where they came from, starting out as slaves, I mean, that's an incredible story, and one we can all draw inspiration from, I believe.
I think the residents there have inherited this spirit of independence, self-reliance, awareness of themselves, and their coming and settling in Trinidad, and the fact that all these grants are still there exactly as they were. I think this is something special.
If you are able to identify historically and culturally with your ancestral base, it gives you a greater grounding, it gives you a greater sense of identity, it gives you a greater sense of consciousness. And this is what the American community has.
A few years ago, a number of our ancestors began research, and the research ended in the production of a number of documents. My father, Alfred Boise Huggins, wrote the book, The Saga of the Companies. And it is in that literature that I got a clear sense of what it was all about.
The history of slavery is undoubtedly, it's one of the worst crimes perpetrated by one group of people on another group of people. But equally, I think what history shows us is that all of us will have difficult questions to answer.
I think documentaries like The Merikins, being an outstanding example, are so important in conveying this sense of history for younger people particularly. They all speak to a kind of reviving consciousness about the importance of history.
We could sit here now and know that we're proud to be Americans.
Oh, I am very proud to be American. I know that my foreparents fought for our freedom and some died, and I'm very proud.
We stand tall because we stand on the backs of our ancestors. They gave us a legacy, a tradition of religious dedication, hard work, sacrifice.
I'm proud of the legacy that was passed on to me, and I hope I could pass it on to many more.
They left a legacy of hard work, of dedication to hard work. Because one of the characteristics was that they came to Trinidad and worked hard. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And now, as they are trying to develop the area, the various company villages are coming together to develop the whole of Moruga into all kinds of very commendable projects.
I'm really very proud to be a descendant of the American. And I feel it especially when I meet people who would walk up to me and say, I'm a Jackson, I'm a Huggins, I'm American, because it means so much. It's a sense of identity and a sense of community.
I am Akila Jaramugi, and I am a proud descendant of the American people. Tracing the descendants and the family, I am one of the great-granddaughters of Papa Nee's clan, the Elliots. Prince Elliot was my great-great-grandfather. We have been waiting for this moment, where we can really empower the people, educate them about the great history of free blacks in Trinidad, from whence we came and the way forward.
The story would go on. It's not about to die. Yes, it might flounder like with everything else, but it would go back up.
And so I think that the Americans, 200 years later, when their story is really just emerging, that the harrowing period of time, the 2 years that they were involved in this war, certainly they deserve to be honored in their quest for freedom, and no better place for it to happen than in Trinidad.
What we learn from looking at the Americans is actually that there's if you like, a constant need for people to be free, and people will take amazing steps and courageous actions in order to do that.
By viewing this video, more people will be inspired by this powerful story of what transpired in the 1800s from the U.S., the migration of African American slaves to Trinidad. These are the types of stories that come alive and make youth interested in learning about people and cultures.
Amid the undergrowth of hidden histories, the wilderness of the forgotten, there are clearings within memory where untold stories can be rebuilt word by word. The story of the Merikins has cleared the way and finally found itself deservedly in the light.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. I looked over yonder, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home, a band of angels, they coming towards me, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.